There's a crisis going on in higher education in America today. American citizens are ignorant on topics like civics and history and other subjects traditionally taught at the collegiate level in the United States. One poll from the Annenberg Center for Public Policy found that only a quarter of Americans could correctly name all three branches of the United States government. Clearly, this is a problem. Not only do citizens not know basic facts about civics, history, and other subjects traditionally taught on college campuses, but they also don't see why knowing these facts might be important. The solution to this problem might lie in a revival of classical education in the United States. Let's start by defining this type of education. As Dr. Thomas Lindsay, a distinguished fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, explains, a classical liberal education is one that teaches the philosophical, theological, scientific, and historic aspects of the Western tradition.
Real liberal education takes its vision from the model of a perfected human being, someone who's fully flourishing. So, because we exist in time and space, we study mathematics, we study natural science. Because we are, as Aristotle said, political animals, we study politics. Because we have what's called today the religious impulse, we study theology. These are not just random choices that were made. This is what constitutes a fully flourishing human being. This is what makes for what used to be called the good life. The good life was always the animating concern. It was the compass by which liberal education guided itself.
But in the past half-century, as Dr. Jacob Howland, provost of the University of Austin, explains, classical education has declined in America.
In 1988, Stanford decided that its famous Western civilization program had to go. And Jesse Jackson went to Stanford and led chants of hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go. And that's a very elite school. And from that point on, a lot of other universities began to drop sort of concentrations on, core requirements that would introduce students to the great books and the great ideas.
Opponents of classical education point out the poor return on investment of a liberal arts degree. Former Secretary of Education William Bennett instead encourages students to pursue STEM majors.
We talk a lot about STEM jobs in the book because they are the jobs, it seems, that are very much worth it. And they're the course of study that, at least at the present, is quite worth it.
Proponents, on the other hand, argue that a classical education has a number of benefits. Author John Agresto believes that classically educated students learn how to think and how to live virtuously.
So the liberal arts are, in a sense, something that grew out of the education of free men to now being the education that might make us as men and women freer. Teach us to think for ourselves, imagine for ourselves, and ask why. Always ask why.
Proponents also point out that classical education is important to society. Justin Dyer, head of the Civitas Institute at the University of Texas, argues that without a classically educated populace, America cannot survive.
The motto of the University of Missouri, which in this anglicized Latin is Disciplina Praesidium Civitatis, and it comes originally from this quote from Mirabeau Lamar, the second president of the Republic of Texas, and he said that a cultivated mind is the guardian genius of democracy. This was his vision of education in a republic, a self-governing republic. The idea is that we need an educated citizenry in order to maintain free government over time. And so the question, why is this important for our society? Part of the reason it's important is because we live in a free society, in a self-governing republic, and that simply can't be sustained without education.
So what do we do with all this information? Well, of course, not every student wants or needs a liberal arts degree, and rightfully so. But as Julia Hayduck of Baylor University explains, just because someone isn't majoring in the liberal arts does not mean they cannot receive a classical education.
I think there's a sort of a perception, a false perception, that if you're a scientist, if you're a STEM person, like what you do is just STEM. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't also be reading books. It doesn't mean you shouldn't also be thinking about the important questions of life and death and why we do these things. But science can't tell you what you should do. I mean, that is simply not a question that science can answer.
In the next 20 years, colleges and universities need to reinstate or create core curriculum that require students of all majors to have some degree of classical education. This type of education teaches people to be critical thinkers and reflective citizens, and without it, the United States cannot survive.